started, I told you this time we're going to be talking about apologetics. And apologetics is explaining why that you're right. It's not apologizing that you're wrong. It's explaining that you're right and you have the truth. So the first thing that we need to work on is, starting at the beginning, is the existence of God. So there are many proofs to the existence of God. And the first one we're going to look at today, we'll look at 5 of them. Of the many, we'll look at 5. The first one is probably the most popular and most commonly used. And we need to lock this door to cut off the traffic. Thank you. All right, so the first one is probably the most popular and the one that most people, if they know it, usually knows this one. It's called causality. In other words, the definition of causality is cause is that which contributes in any way, shape, or form, whatever, to the production of something. You were, and the thing that is produced is called the effect. So you were all the effect of a cause. Your parents were the cause. You were the effect. The door, everything in the world was produced by something else. That door, this table, it came from somewhere. Somebody made the plastic for it. Somebody put it together. So everything has everything that causes something. A cause is something that produces something, and what is produced is the effect. And the relationship between the cause and the effect is called causality. And everywhere you look, as I say, you can see causes producing effects. So causality exists in the world. And the effect of one cause can produce other causes. An effect can lead to another cause, and that effect then becomes a cause of something else, and it can start a chain. Your parents produced you were the effect. You can produce children, they will be another effect. You will then become a cause. So it can go on. The chains of cause and effect can cross over, and they can intermingle. Like I say, this table had many causes. I mean, somebody made the plastic, somebody put it together. Where did the plastic come from that made the table? I mean, it has many causes, and they can cross each other at many points, so that causes conversion become a single effect. But likewise, effects can also branch off and become causes for many other things. You can have more than one child. So for example, let's give you some concrete examples. The sun causes sunlight, or sunlight comes from the sun. So the sun is the cause, and the effect is the sunlight. Sunlight then can be a cause because it produces effects like sunburn. You can get sunburn. But sunlight also produces other effects, like it'll dry your clothes. It causes plants to grow. So it can have more than one effect. Likewise, and then the sunburn that came from the sunlight can also have multiple effects. It can cause blistering, it can cause redness, it can cause pain. The pain can cause you to not sleep that night. And so the line goes on and on. Similarly, like the table, a statue exists or is caused because a person made it. They used materials, which also had causes, making the materials. They used tools, which also had causes, people that made them, made them out of other things. So various causes went into its effect, and each of these causes could affect many other things. So, I mean, it's like I say, they intertwine and branch out. They go in all directions. So, because like this plastic can make this table, but it could also make furniture. It could also make doors. It could go into plastic bags. You know, it could go into many different things. So there can be various effects from one cause, and many causes can go into making one effect. So, as I say, they intertwine and go out. So the existence of cause and effect relationship in the world is everywhere. And it's evidence that exists, because you can't look around you and find anything that wasn't caused by something else. The man who denies causality denies everything. First of all, such a man has no right to take medicine. Why? Because if he's taking medicine, he believes then that it will help him, which is the effect of the medicine. But if he doesn't believe that there will be an effect from the medicine, why are you taking the medicine? The same man shouldn't be allowed to eat, because he's assuming, therefore, that eating the food will cause nourishment or health for his body. And if he doesn't believe that there is effect from that cause, then why is he eating? So neither has that man a right to defend the theory that there is no such thing as cause or effect. Because by the very fact that he's making an argument, he's assuming that is a cause. And he's assuming the effect will be that you will believe him. So if he doesn't believe that his argument can affect you in any way, why is he making the argument? I mean, there is no way of denying causality. Evolution has tried to deny it, but, you know, we'll get to that. You can't get around it. You just can't get around it, because everywhere you look, you see something, and where did it come from? And by the same token, if there was no such thing as causality, girls, you can come up here and take any of these chairs, just move them back there and yourself. So if there is no such thing as causality, you can't blame a murderer. You can't hold him responsible for killing someone for his victim's death. Why? Because if there is no such thing as cause and effect, the victim can't be blamed on the murderer. That's not the effect. I mean, that's an effect from a cause, and if you don't believe in cause and effect, you can't believe in that. Same way, you can't blame a bad student for getting bad grades, a lazy student for getting bad grades. Why? Because there's no effect from a cause, if you believe that. So, causality cannot be denied. There is no way to deny causality. So, all causes can be traced back to a first cause, which was self-existent. All right, so we need to prove this. We've proved that causality exists, because indeed every object, every event in this finite world must have its cause or causes, and these causes have to be adequate. That is, they have to be sufficient to account fully for all the positive being or perfection of that effect. So, for example, this table, this is a finite thing. It had a beginning, and it will also have an end. It's a finite thing. So, it had a cause, many causes. But those causes that brought this table into being had to be adequate or sufficient to make it the way that it is, that it's as perfect as it is right now, and it's not really perfect because everything's flawed, but as adequately perfect as it is, had to come from those causes and to produce this effect. If one were to examine any object, you would come up with many things that caused it to exist. You can trace everything back as far as you want. It will always have another cause. So you get to a point, all right, let's just take human beings. You can trace them all the way back to Adam and Eve. Where can you go from there? If the evolutionist wants to trace things back, he'll trace you back to an atom or a cosmic dust somewhere that somehow became living. I don't know, we're not going there. But even if where did the cosmic dust come from? So everything can be traced back to something else. There has to be another cause. Now, if you're reading the book and using the book, it goes into there's many different names for different causes. Like the tools that make up something have a particular name. I think there's called efficient causes, material causes, and so on. We're not going into that. You don't need to know that. We just need to know that there is such a thing as cause and effect. So, but if you really want to, get the book and read those paragraphs. So everything that exists has to have a sufficient explanation for its existence. In other words, it had to come from something. Nothing can exist without a sufficient reason for its existence. It came into being for a reason. This table was made by someone for a reason. You were made for a reason. Everything, the building here was made for a reason. Everything has to have a reason to exist. Well, why do you make it? Oh, just because I had nothing else to do that day? I don't think so. Even if you had nothing else to do that day, you probably put it to use doing something that you knew needed to be done. So there was always a need, a necessity. Obviously, the sufficient reason must be found either in the thing itself or in what gave it existence. In other words, there are two possibilities. One thing, it is so perfect that it has to exist and cannot be non-existent. There's only two things. There's only two possibilities. In other words, it exists of itself. It was not caused by anything. And the reason why it was not caused by anything was because it was so perfect in itself that it is self-existent. The other possibility is it has received its existence by the action of some efficient cause. So in other words, it was either caused or it wasn't caused. The thing that was caused by something else, all along that line. The thing that is not caused, that never could be caused, is perfect within itself. So perfect that it exists and didn't need anybody to need it. It didn't need to be made. So, if a thing is so perfect that it must exist and can't be non-existent, then we say it's self-existent. It's not that it created itself, but it always existed. Because, in a way, it is its own creation. The only thing that fits that bill is God. Such a thing contains in itself its own reason for existence. it must exist by reason of its own perfection, and it has to be perfect, it essentially has to be perfect. It has no cause. And it's also, therefore, eternal. It always existed because it had no existence prior to it. It had no maker, no creator. So it always was, and therefore it always will be. It's eternal. It's a necessary being. It's needed within itself, not outside of itself. And it's not dependent upon the actions of any other cause. There's only one thing that fits this definition, and we call that God. Anything that fits this definition we define as God. The other alternative is a being that received its existence from the action of something else, a cause. And that thing, you, me, the walls, the table, are not necessary in themselves, but contingent upon the being that created them. We were a need for that cause. In other words, your parents wanted you, and they needed you to fulfill themselves, to fulfill their marriage, to fulfill their love for each other. This building was needed, as a place to have that. It always fulfills a need. And it's dependent upon the action of that cause. If people didn't get together to build this structure, it wouldn't be here. If your parents didn't get together to produce you, you wouldn't be here. So there are only two possible kinds of beings. One, eternal, uncaused, perfect, necessary beings. And two, contingent beings that is efficiently caused. So uncaused beings and caused beings. All contingent things, all caused beings, must and can be tracked back to their beginning, to a first cause. As I say, you can track back human beings to, as Catholics, Adam and Eve, who caused them. Their cause, what caused them had to be the other being, the uncreated being. So, all contingent things can be traced back to their first cause, which is itself necessary and uncaused being. In other words, there has to be that uncaused being to create these caused things. But he cannot be caused. Because then whoever made him would be the uncaused thing. So, if A comes from B, and B comes from C, and C comes from D, and D comes from F, and so on, somewhere, sometime, we have to find the first cause, which of itself has to be uncaused and a necessary being. One can't trace the chain back indefinitely or infinitely. The line cannot go on into infinity. And there are people who will try to make you think that it can. Because one has to reach the beginning sometime. Shorten infinity down to its base. There still has to be that first thing. Nothing doesn't come from, something comes from something else, not from nothing. So there has to be that first cause. An infinite number of finite things is impossible. An infinite number of finite things, and we're all finite, is impossible. The finite added to finite never equals infinite. Reason, your intelligence, forces us to conclusion that contingent things involve the necessarily the existence of an uncaused, necessary first cause. Logically, that's all you can get from this. That somewhere there had to be a first cause. And that cause itself could not be created, could not have been made by anybody else, because then it's no longer a first cause. Can there be more than one uncaused, necessary first cause? That's the next question. So we have a first cause, which we call God, which is just a word that we give to that first cause, if you're following this philosophy here. And all of us are caused. This first cause is what causes everything else. Can there be more than one of that? Can there be more than one God, in other words? The first cause is one and only one. There can only be one. Why? For a being that is so perfect, remember, it has to be perfect. For a being that is so perfect that it must exist, and must have fullness of perfection, it must have that perfection in a wholly unlimited manner. There can be no limitations to this first cause. It's perfect in every way, shape, and form. Because if it needed something, it would be deficient, and therefore it would need something to cause it to be better, which can't. If you're thinking logically, that can't be. So this being, God, this first cause, we'll follow their idea, we won't call it God. This is the first cause. It has to be perfect, and it can't be limited in any way. Those perfections have to all be perfect and unlimited. Now, because such a being is self-existent and wholly independent of the causes, it was not caused by anything. Now, causes do two things. They make efficient use of what is, and they limit the effect. So it's to mark off its perfections from those of other things. So causes do two things, and because this is not cause, it cannot have those two things working upon it. It's above those things. So in other words, it has to be perfect, and it can't be limited in any way. Now, a being that is independent of causes as a necessity is also independent of any kind of limitation, which causes impose. Causes impose limits. This table is limited in how much weight it'll bear, in its size, in its shape. It's limited. You're limited. We all have limitations. But a first cause has none, because he is the source of everything else. So a first cause has to be free from limitations. In other words, is infinite. Now, an infinite being is unique. Can there be more than one truly perfect person, being? Person means human. So can there be more than one truly perfect being? There simply can't be more than one such being. If it was more than one, then there would be a distinction between the two, which means one of them would have a limit. For example, let's say the two of you are both perfect and unlimited, but you don't look the same. So obviously there is a limitation. You don't look like him, he doesn't look like you. There's limitations here. Which is better looking? If you don't look the same, one of you must be better looking than the other. That shows a limitation. If you don't have the same intelligence, one of you must have more intelligence than the other. That's a limitation, which therefore means that you're imperfect, and therefore you can't be the first cause. Sorry, guys, I'm not God. In case you didn't know that. So as much as, let's say A and B are identical, in as much as A doesn't have the same perfections as B, therefore, one of them is imperfect. And therefore, neither of them is infinite. They cancel each other out. Think about this. And if you think about this, you really meditate on it, you will begin to understand a little bit about the Blessed Trinity. How there is only one God, but three persons that are equal and perfect, yet distinct. We spent a lot of time thinking about that, but this does not contradict that, because there is only one God, one cause. So we conclude that there can be one necessary being, because a necessary being is infinite. Hence, a necessary first cause must be one and infinite. There can only be one, and he has to be infinite. And again, he also has to be eternal. He also has to be perfect. So now, if you're a philosopher or a logician, you can put this in what they call a syllogism. A syllogism is a way of proving something by giving what they call premises. If you give a major premise and then a minor premise that follows from that, well, that is connected to it, the major premise being the main condition. And if both of those are true, then the conclusion should also be true. So the major premise here is that contingent things demand the existence of one necessary infinite first cause. In other words, all things that exist that are limited had to come from one necessary infinite first cause. It can all be traced back to that one and only one necessary infinite first cause. Now, the world and all things in the world are contingent beings. Therefore, the world and all things in the world demand the existence of a one necessary infinite first cause. And we call that first cause God. From our remarks on causality and from the argument just discussed, we know that this cause is one, it's necessary, it's infinite, it's eternal, and this being, this first cause, is God. There's no getting around that. There has to be a God. If you believe in causality, and again, causality is not something you can even deny, because you deny all rationality. You deny yourself being an intelligent person. There has to be a God. Evolutionists try to muddle with the logic by talking about ages and eons, how long it took. But again, time has nothing to do with this. Whether the world was made quickly, as in the book of Genesis, 7 days, quickly, or over billions of years, like the evolutionists want to tell you, it doesn't change the fact that it had to come from a cause, a first cause, that was one, eternal, infinite, and necessary, and therefore, God. No escaping that. They try to muddle it, by talking all around the issue. But ultimately, time has nothing to do with it. You can believe in evolution, you can believe in creationism. It all comes down to that one being at the very beginning of all things that started it. And that being could not have a beginning, because then he would just be a regular cause like everything else. He could not have a beginning. He was absolutely necessary, self-existent in himself, who caused everything else. So that's how you prove the existence of God using causality, cause and effect. Everything comes from a first cause. You all understood that, right? Good. I'm glad. No questions, right? No. Are there any questions?
Well, we know the Big Bang was the cause.
Well, that was a cause, but what blew up? What blew up? Whatever blew up had to come from something. No questions. Good. All right. So next time we'll look at another cause. I think it's